I always feel like saying "Good morning, Vietnam," like from the movie
Yeah.
with Robin Williams. So, this. So, thank you everybody for joining. So far, I have 0 people on. It's a heck of a way to start the day. So, I'm just teasing. But today is March 9th, and today is the anniversary, I think, of the bottom in the stock market back on 2009. It was one of the lowest points I think we hit in probably 30, 40 years. I would have to double check on that number, but I definitely know it was the floor before a massive rally off of those lows. I don't know if it was March 6th or March 9th. I don't remember exactly which date, but the S&P 500 hit 666. You fast forward to today, the S&P 500 is 3,800. So it's gone up, quite a bit, because 666 is not exactly, times 6. Let's just see real quick, because right now it's about 3,800 or so. So the S&P 500, when it hit that low, it would hit 3996 if it were to be 6 times that number. So the S&P 500 today is, believe it or not, it's at 3,800, and it's within striking distance of exactly being 6-fold increase in 12 years, which is pretty significant. Now, keep in mind, all the people that experienced that massive decline first didn't make 666 times their money. They're probably up about 3 times. But if you were able to time the low, that's how much you made. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening today. The futures are up today, and part of the reason why the futures are up as much as they are, NASDAQ futures are up 2%, S&P I think about 70, 80 basis points, is because Congress was able to get through this bill with essentially 0 Republicans, and Wall Street definitely didn't expect that both the House and the Democratic Senate, with barely hanging on to a majority. I think obviously in the Senate, the tiebreaker is the VP, and that they would be able to pull this off without any sort of defections. So even though the U.S. Senate killed the provision to raise the minimum wage, which, as a capitalist and as someone in the markets my entire career, I actually believe that the minimum wage should have gone up, which is contrary to what people think. And I understand the criticism, and I know plenty of people in retail and the restaurant industry, and and I've started to explain why it should graduate up with regards to the math. I mean, the average person in the United States was making, the minimum wage was $1.60 in 1970. You fast forward to today, at a minimum, with productivity gain increases, the minimum wage should be at least $6.40. That's not including inflation, folks. Just pure economic growth that we were entitled to from productivity gains over 40 years would have entitled the minimum wage to be, that. So in terms of somebody asking me, should it double to 15? I know this sounds crazy, but it should move more in lockstep with what productivity gains in this country are over time, period. If we get more productive as a society, the minimum wage should be tied to how productive we are as a society. So now if you want to make an argument, Bobby, I would think minimum wage should go down, we're getting less productive, then I would be like, okay, that makes sense. But it's illogical the way it's currently structured, and nobody uses and looks at the math in this situation. That's my big knock about the way it's currently set up. Okay, so but I do agree that it shouldn't be done overnight, just like we've been bled overnight. We haven't been bled overnight with our tax policy. They've been squeezing it out of us year after year, decade after decade. And so we need to reverse that. And as we reverse that, maybe as we cut the size of government, we can simultaneously increase minimum wage. I don't have a problem tying those two together as metrics. Hey, we'll increase minimum wage as we shrink the size of the government to absorb the transitionary costs to all the businesses in this country. Because as every business and individual is paying less in taxes, we can clearly afford to pay more in minimum wages to everybody else on the bottom of the economic spectrum. Okay, Goldman Sachs has come out and said they expect 6 million jobs to be brought back online this year. Right now, they still think there's 9.4 million fewer jobs than there was a year ago, 9.4 million less than there were a year ago. But with this stimulus that's taken place, now I want to talk about that because this bill does look as though it will be signed possibly today. This stimulus bill that's in place, by the middle of this year, supposedly the economy will be at a higher GDP than it was prior to the pandemic. Okay? However, we have 10 million fewer jobs, basically 9.4 million. So 9.4 million jobs less. And then we have, we're back to where we were economically, but it's extremely misleading and false as far as I'm concerned. Why? Because we spent $3.3 trillion that we had to take on debt to restore the economy last year. Now, before the stimulus was passed, the expected deficit of the United States, folks, was $2.3 trillion. So $2.3 trillion of deficit spending was already in the pipeline prior to this other bill being passed, which they estimate will be another 1.2 trillion of deficit spending. So between 2 years, we've spent almost $7 trillion more than the government took in. Okay? That money has to be paid back, everybody. And so $7 trillion on 140 million workers, because I think the workforce is about 140, 150. Just depends on who you look at. Everybody seems to have a different way of computing this. But $7 trillion on 140 million Americans, okay, is $50,000 of new debt was taken on. Okay? Let me say that again. We took on $50,000 of new debt for each and every worker in America in the past 2 years. Okay? So when I hear this crap that the economy's flat, Bobby, we're back to where we were 2 years ago. It's all horseshit. It's not. When you sit there and you tell me, hey, Bobby, I make $50,000 a year, but I took on $20,000 of credit card debt. So I spent 70, so I make 70,000 a year, Bobby. What do you think about that? I'd be like, this is an example of what happened when the Bolsheviks took over the school system. Because the Bolsheviks and all these communists that have taken over the school system are trying to collapse our system by bogging it down with a bunch of debt. So these scumbags that are running it are going to say, hey, you know what, all this debt, you don't owe us this money that we just printed out of the thin air. But, you got to give up some rights, and then, we'll give you some minimum basic income. So this is the way they're trying to back into stealing our rights as a society, folks. So this is not, they're not doing us any favors. And the fact that we are not doing a better job of getting people educated on these points is it's on all of us, okay? I'm trying to do my little part. Everybody else has to do their part. We all have to step up and get the word out what the heck is going on, because it's not going to end well. This whole thing could break apart if we don't fix it. Now, the good thing is we have a tremendous amount of wealth in this country. And you got to remember, wealth isn't just physical assets. We have so much wealth that it's never physical. It's our spirituality. It's our brain power. The human beings, the true wealth of our nation is free-minded individuals, free spirits that can create. We need to go back to creation type of capitalism, not crony satanic capitalism where they skim and they try to take more than they are entitled to from people that create. My gripe has never been with people that create and make money. I don't have any problem with someone like Tiger Woods making $80 million a year when you got tens of millions of people watching him, and it's his skill that people want to watch. I don't have a problem with that. But you know what I do have a problem with? Is scumbags that use politics to get ahead in corporate America and figure out how to outsource American jobs and then take those jobs into slavery, atheist type of nations and then pocket the difference on all the jobs that they got rid of. That's my gripe. So I want to make it clear, that's not capitalism, folks. That is evil globalism, and that's just, it's literally, I think it's satanic. I really do. I was sitting there thinking about this morning on the drive into work. The average person in Mexico as a seventh grade, they finish they only have like 7% of their population finishes high school. Okay, 7% graduation rate from high school. And then, in hindsight, 30, 40 years ago, we did this stuff with China. I'm going to explain this real quick because there wasn't a lot of economic stuff to report. So I kind of hit on some of it, but I'll go over this economic stuff instead, that how it ties into what's going on right now with this whole thing, this whole bill that was passed. But anyways, after World War II, Europe was in shambles. The United States spent the money, and we did the Marshall Plan, and we helped rebuild Europe. And we did it not just because of altruistic reasons. We wanted a trading partner, and we wanted to see Europe do well because we wanted to keep communism in check. And that's what we did. We spent a lot of money, and Europe benefited from it. The United States benefited from it. Obviously, Europe took advantage of us. I do believe that, by the tune of over $100 billion a year, and overstayed our generosity, so to speak. But fortunately, the past administration fixed that problem. Okay, and so now let's look at Mexico. Mexico is a Christian nation. They're probably 98, 99% Roman Catholic. The United States is historically a Judeo-Christian nation. The founding principles of this system are Judeo-Christian values. So Jewish laws and and Christian laws from the New Testament, Old Testament, New Testament. That's the facts, folks. You may not like it if you're not Jewish and Christian, but the reality is that our society is structured around the unbelievable playbook that has been passed down for thousands of years now, where it outlines what you need to have a successful society. And I do believe that it happens to be the greatest book in the world, and that you can use a tremendous amount of these principles even if you're not religious. Just the stories and the principles of how human beings behave, if you read those stories, you'll see for yourself that it was definitely, inspired divinely, I guess, divine inspiration. But anyways, going back to Mexico, I kind of got off on a tangent on this whole thing. As Mexico is a Christian nation, the United States is a Judeo-Christian nation. If we would have spent the money building up Mexico instead of China, I just want you to imagine what that world would look like. If we helped a country that shared our values and wasn't atheist, amoral, evil, going around trying to dominate the rest of the planet and spy on everybody and steal and spread disease. Think about the four horsemen, folks. Pestilence, famine, all the things that, death, that they don't have any qualms about doing that. I'm not talking about the Chinese people. I'm talking about the corrupt CCP. If we would have said, you know what, Bobby, we're going to, go back in 40 years from now, or 40 years earlier, we're going to help Mexico instead. And you know what? They have more in common with us, and we would have done a Marshall Plan for Mexico. Just imagine if we had the insight to do a Marshall Plan. I don't think it's too late to do a Marshall Plan for Mexico, frankly. I think if we were going to do something, when you have people in Mexico making less than $10,000 a year, and they don't have the same economic oh boy, my battery's dying. I better wrap this up, folks. Anyway, they don't have. I forgot my charger in the office. So, but that's okay. I'll keep it a little shorter. So basically, when you have people making, the average person in Mexico makes 10 grand a year, you can see why a lot of them try to break the law and come into the United States, because their kids can be educated in the United States, and the cost per child being educated in the U.S. is over $10,000 a year. It's not a complicated equation. Now you combine that fact with the fact that over half of Mexico is under the age of 18. So their population is probably going to double in the next 25 years, and then possibly double again from there. So theoretically, Mexico might have more people in 50 years than the United States has today. I want you to wrap your head around that. If Mexico has more people than the United States 50 years from now, do you think it would have been a good decision not to help strengthen and build up that economy so that they don't try to leave because their economy is shit and come into the United States? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think our money is better spent? Is it spent on our existing higher cost structure in the United States and trying to bring people in here, or in the cost structure down there that's, one fifth of what ours is? And so that's my argument for why we need to seriously look at partnering more with Mexico to help redo it, so to speak, and do what we should have done a lot earlier with regards to how we did things in Europe after World War II. Okay. And I just want to read this out loud. I posted this earlier. Ever since the U.S. opened up trade with China in the 70s, the average American has had their wages remain stagnant in inflation-adjusted terms. I have done the math on this, and I can back this up. It's a tedious process, but I know I have it somewhere on my computer. But I did all these computations myself. The average person in China has gone from making $250 a year to over 10,000. So they've gone up 40-fold since we opened up trade with China. And we opened up trade with China with this guy named George H.W. Bush. Yeah, that Bush, that crime family. So anyways, they've been criminals this whole time right underneath their eyes, but they do like to use the Bible to say, look at how pious we are, as they ripped us off and sold us out. Okay, so we've been flat, and then China's up 40-fold. Making more sense why a lot of this country is upset? And does it make a little more sense as to why I'm doing these videos? Because I'm tired of looking the other way when people aren't bringing this up. Okay. Wealth. The average American had their wealth as a percentage of income earned go from 6.36 times. So in the early 70s, the average American had 6.36 times the wealth that they made per year. Okay? You make 10 grand, you're 11,000, you have about 70,000. That was the median wealth, okay? To your income. Now, the average American income, median, is about 60,000, but the median net worth of Americans is 120. So we went from 6.36 to 2. Is that just? We took almost a 70% haircut, folks. Okay, where we were in the early 70s with the advent of unbelievable technologies and all these tools to make us far more efficient. I'm sorry, my lighting is coming up here. I got to get a different studio. The sun's coming in through the blinds, and I'm looking like I'm going white. I don't know if I could get any whiter, folks. but anyways, I gotta get a studio without these windows. Anyways, so going back to, this is quite a decline, obviously. Meanwhile, the top 0.1%, so the 1 out of 1,000 people in this country, have had that number explode probably 100-fold, 100 times. Okay, so last second here is I don't know what is going on. Turn this off. Okay, maybe this is a little better. Oh my gosh, this is just making it worse. Okay, sorry everybody. I'm sure. Thank you guys for having a sense of humor. This was not by design. So, anyways, this the top 1% went up by at least 100-fold, and then you had that's not working. And then the top 1% had it go up by 12-1. So the average American's flat. The top 0.1% go up 100-fold. Relatively speaking, folks, they were already super rich. They just shot up and became super rich. And then the top 0.1% went up 12-fold. This is what is called wage differential arbitrage. Let's do a nice economics class and explain how we can take cheap labor over here, and then we'll outsource the expensive labor over here, and then we pocket the difference, and we'll do that in a corporate boardroom. Sound familiar? This is why 60,000 factories left the United States because of the WTO. And guess who set that up, folks? George Bush, okay? The son. 3 months after September 11th, China entered the WTO. Look it up. 12/11/01. And guess who helped George Bush win the election with the Chads in Florida? Oh, yeah, his brother Jeb, little Jebby. Jeb helps him win the election, or maybe he might have stolen the election. I don't know. Maybe. I have no idea, folks. I'm not making that claim, but I guess maybe it's worth looking into, because there's this criminal traitor called McCain in Arizona that did a lot of other damage at the exact same time with Arizona and set the pace for the whole country by getting everything going from air-gapped paper ballots to these corrupt machines. And I'm not naming which ones. I think there's some corrupt ones. Maybe they've been compromised by viruses. Who knows? All I know is it's a big problem. Okay, if that wasn't enough that they screwed us over on the wages of all these Americans, okay, you have a situation where they encouraged Americans to slaughter future generations. This was an economic slaughter, folks, self-induced. Instead of killing people in gas chambers, they encouraged people to kill their babies. And there's been over 60 million plus abortions since this happened. This was economic warfare of a different sort. These Satanists encouraged 60 million babies to be slaughtered. So if you look at that today, there's probably 150 to 200 fewer million Americans today. 150 to 200 million fewer Americans protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not just in the U.S., but globally. So from a standpoint of a competitive perspective, they did an incredible job of trying to destroy more people that were free-spirited and God-loving by this policy than people realized. This was never about choice. This was about control and trying to kill off any of the people that would actually rise up against tyranny globally. Okay? And that's why these same scumbags that open up stuff with China, they're just as evil as the CCP. And they did it because they knew that these communists share their amoral, atheistic views of treating people as though they're all expendable, instead of realizing that we're all children of God. Okay, now they drugged up our cities. So keep in mind, the Americans of African heritage and some of the Hispanic communities, probably more the African heritage communities, they drugged them up, and then they broke up their families by creating an economic drug called welfare. I think it was like 70, 75, 80% of black families they had a nuclear family, cohesive, before the great, horrible, and it's not great, the satanic thing that Lyndon Johnson signed that re-enslaved Americans of African descent. And then they drugged them up in the process and kept them locked up in the cities, which they have the same goal of doing that to all of us. So we should look at our own history as a nation and see how evil these people are. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just go talk to some Americans of African heritage that grew up in the inner city. Now, it just so happens I grew up in Chicago, where I was the minority. And as a kid, where, my school, I was probably one of, every 8 kids was, maybe 1 out of every 8 kids was white, and the rest were black and Spanish. I could speak to what it looked like. And I got to tell you, when you're poor, folks. So when you're stuck and you're poor, if I didn't have parents that were very religious and said, you need to stay focused, get your education, we got to get the heck out of this situation that we're in, that we're kind of like trapped. And these inner cities were a trap, the way they were structured. They did it on purpose. Now they destroyed our religious institutions. How did they do that? Right? Because they installed a bunch of pedophiles across the churches in this country, other religious institutions, other different levels of government. They put in a bunch of pedophiles. And that's the way it is. You want to undermine credibility of the institution, you put in people that are the most despicable and evil among us, those that prey on children. These people should face the harshest penalties ever. They should be treated as war criminals, as far as I'm concerned, because they're committing war crimes against the most vulnerable and innocent among us. Okay. Then they pretty much bribed every elected official But this is where we do the double speak, folks. We're going to do the double speak. It's not a bribe because we're going to pass a law, and we're going to make a law that says we can do this. We're going to be able to pass a law that's unethical. And if we all agree, then it's okay. It's a law. And that's the way they ran it through, folks. And they've been doing it ever since. They think that they can override ethics and morality by unjust laws. And that's the way they've gotten around legally bribing everybody. It's a bribe. It's a legal bribe, so maybe you can use the two with a little hyphen, I guess, so that, because the technical definition of bribe is it's a crime, but we'll just call it a legal bribe because I think it's much more appropriate. So we, the people, have our work cut out for us, but if we put God first, restore our core 10 commandments as a baseline, and start following the Constitution again, I do believe that we will all witness true freedom and justice for all. So let's hope that happens. So thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate it. God bless you. And may God continue to bless America, and peace be with you. And if you don't have peace, if you put God first, I have no doubt that you will find your peace. Have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you guys at 4 o'clock.